You know, I really hate this term, the new normal. Maybe it's because I've heard it so many times in the last 2 months. But well, today kind of feels like that because while we were supposed to drive the new Honda City all the way back in March over in sunny Goa, here I am rather unceremoniously having just picked up the key to the new city at a dealership in Navi Mumbai. But hey, it's not all bad because this is my city and I know it really well. And on top of that, this is a car we've all been very excited to drive for a very long time.
One thing that hasn't changed from the old normal press junket format is that we have very little time. Luckily, the cars are all ready and waiting in the parking lot.
Well, would you look at that? All sanitized and kept ready for our driving pleasure. Nothing left to do but to get in and start to drive. Well, time to take the wraps off the car and off myself and get going.
Before we go any further though, what do you think of the new Honda City? Is it a big enough step up over the old one? Would you buy one or would you go in for one of its rivals, the Rapid, Vento, Yaris, Ciaz or Verna? Let us know in the comments and be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to stay notified.
The variant I'm driving is what I personally think should become the mainstay of the Honda City range in India. It's the petrol automatic and it represents the utmost refinement and convenience. And that's important when you want to drive your city in the city. What they've done with the driving experience is make it, and I didn't know that this was possible, even easier and more convenient than before. The steering is very light and quick enough, and while it's not overly aggressive this time, it is very good at changing this car's direction with ease. They've also taken measures to improve visibility with a low dashboard and wing mirrors that are now on the doors rather than on the A-pillars, so you can see through that gap over there. And you will just love these seats. You could just sink into them no matter what size or shape you are. They've also done a great job of the ride quality. It's a great blend of suppleness, bump absorption and overall comfort.
They managed to do this by stiffening up the chassis considerably, by 20% in fact, using more ultra high strength steel, which has allowed them to then soften up the suspension, which in turn gives the city's ride quality an almost European maturity. The downside of the softer suspension is that the car rolls quite a bit more, and so while the steering is good, handling overall isn't quite as enjoyable as older cities. Still, it is among the better cars to drive in this segment, mind you.
Now, over to the powertrain itself. As before, it's a 1.5 litre naturally aspirated engine mated to a CVT gearbox. But it's not the same 1.5 litre iVTEC engine as before. It's a new one with dual overhead camshafts instead of single overhead camshafts. And it now produces 120 horsepower and 145 Newton meters of torque. As for the CVT, it has 7 steps. It comes with paddle shifters. And Honda claims that it's been made a lot friendlier in that it doesn't have as much of a rubber band effect and it makes better use of all the revs to deliver more performance. We'll see how much that is true. The first impressions, like I said before, are of refinement and convenience. Just slot it into drive, tread lightly on the accelerator pedal and the car takes care of everything else. It's quite brisk off the line and then it settles into a smooth cruise. And yes, you can poke and prod at it quite a bit and it won't get caught out as easily as some older CVTs. The acceleration is pretty much in sync with the revs and you really have to kick it hard to try and catch it out and make it deliver some of that rubber band effect. I'd go so far as saying this is right up there with the best CVTs we've ever driven. Now if you want a bit more enthusiasm out of this powertrain, you can simply tap the gear lever down into Sport mode, locks the revs a little bit higher, and this way it's always raring to go. Now it's at higher revs that you hear the engine quite a bit more, But it's not a really bad or thrashy sound, it's just that it's louder. And for further control, you can always use the paddle shifts. And what's impressive is that you keep your foot in when you're in manual mode and it will actually hold all the way to the red line. But all things said and done, this is an automatic, a CVT automatic no less, and it does its best work at low to medium speeds in the city, and that this car absolutely excels at. To get to know this engine a little bit better, I'm going to have to try another variant. Now, one thing has always held true of the Honda City, and it holds true even now. If you want to have fun in a Honda City, get the petrol manual. You can really feel the intricacies of this new petrol engine with the manual gearbox. It's a new 6-speed manual gearbox up from 5. But did it really need that 6th gear? Because Honda petrol manuals have always been geared rather tall, and I'm going to try and figure out if that's the case here too. Now, to demonstrate that, I'm going to leave it in 3rd gear and let's see how low I can let the speed and the revs drop. Okay, I'm at about 1000 RPM, 920 kph. Put your foot down. And it pulls so smoothly and cleanly. But then it keeps pulling. I'm not shifting gear. It's going, it's going, it's going, and we've hit the speed limit.
But when we did our performance tests, we found that it kept pulling all the way past 150 kph in 3rd gear. The city manual did 0 to 100 kph in a very impressive 10.20 seconds, which is just 0.07 seconds slower than the Skoda Rapid 1-litre TSI manual we tested recently. The petrol automatic meanwhile did 0 to 100 in 12.05 seconds, which is actually over a second quicker than the Verna 1-litre turbo with its DCT auto. On the fuel economy front, we haven't yet done the Autocar India real-world test, but according to ARAI, the petrol manual is rated at 17.8 kpl, while the auto is rated at 18.4 kpl, both figures slightly higher than the old City.
The other characteristic of this engine is that it's almost the opposite of a small capacity turbo in the way it behaves. Where a small capacity downsized turbocharged petrol engine would have a bit of turbo lag, then a strong mid-range, and then the power would taper off towards the end, this was just the opposite. It's very peppy off the line and at low revs. Then the mid-range does get a little bit flat, but it's better than the previous City. And then when you cross about 5000 RPM, it sort of gets a second wind and picks up all over again all the way to 7000 RPM. And that's just the brilliance of these iVTEC engines. They're just so flexible.
Now, I was having so much fun revving the new petrol engine to the high heavens, I'd lost track of time, but luckily, Sergius was on hand to help me out. And he'd been driving the diesel.
Yes, that's right, I'm with the diesel. Now, the engine under the hood of this new Honda City is the same one that's been doing duty in the earlier Honda City as well as the Amaze, and it's a carry forward. Of course, it's been updated to the BS6 norms. One thing that I'm happy to report is refinement levels have improved. If you've seen our earlier reviews, you'll know that we've not really been fans of the diesel in terms of its refinement. But here in the new City, it's a lot better. It isn't as good as the Hyundai Verna engine, but it's not an irritant anymore. And in fact, at certain highway cruising speeds, you'll hear the tires more than you'd hear the engine. In terms of drivability, it's pretty neat. Power below 1500 RPM is muted, but you don't really struggle with lag. It just feels like a change of pace at the 1500 RPM mark, where power then builds nice and evenly up to the 4200 RPM soft rev limiter. With the amount of torque that you have with the diesel, what you can do is you can bring the speed, well, in third, right down to about a crawl. Like right now I'm doing 20 kilometers per hour. It's just moving along fine, nice and smooth. I can drop it a little bit, maybe to about, at about 16. And if I put my foot down, there's no fuss. It's slow, but there's no fuss, and it'll just gently pull up, and there you go, 1500 RPM, and we have power. So you'll certainly have fewer gear shifts driving around in traffic. We also got a chance to run some preliminary acceleration test, and the diesel posted a 0 to 100 km/h time of 12.9 seconds, while 20 to 80 in third and 40 to 100 in fourth were much quicker than the petrol, coming in at 11.4 and 13.89 seconds respectively. In the update to the BS6 emission norms, Honda has used the NOx storage system, thus avoiding the use of the AdBlue liquid that the SCR systems need. But due to some fuel being required for the exhaust after treatment, the new unit's ARAI figure drops slightly to 24.1 km per litre as against the older one's 25.6. And now it's back to Gavin, whom I believe has pulled over to tell you a bit more about the interiors.
The interior of the new city, and where do I start? How about with how premium it looks and feels? It's really a step up from the old Honda City, and in my opinion, right up there with the likes of the Civic. This little strip of wood trim really does wonders, as does this soft touch material with a nice little hem and a stitch on it. The seats also leather wrap perforated, these little headrests that are horizontal and look like they belong on an armchair perhaps. Okay, there are some hard plastics further down on the dash, but they're very nicely textured, and so they don't feel so out of place. They all go in together really well, and nice little touches like the brushed silver trim. It all adds up and really feels special. You can only find some unsavory, slightly harder, scratchier plastics maybe lower down here, but then again, this car has been so heavily sanitized by the showroom where we picked it up from that everything is shiny right now, so it's a little harder to tell. But apart from that, there are loads of other things to enjoy, like this 8-inch touchscreen. It has a matte finish, which is very nice because it doesn't cast reflections into your eyes when you're driving, but on the other hand, it's not bright enough and sometimes you can't see it in certain lights. It does of course have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto and a lot of connected features with a partner app. More on that later. It's also got these really nice physical controls for the AC vents, and they do this nice little click effect when you operate them. It's after criticism that the touchscreen system was a little too hard to use in the previous city. The steering wheel, again a really big highlight because it's got these very premium feeling controls with a click scroll wheel, lots of buttons, and they're really well finished.
Similarly, the part digital dials. The speedometer is analog, but the rest of the thing is a screen. But it's so subtly done, so clear to read, and so very well executed, it's easily better than the gimmicky looking screen in the Verna. It even has a G-force meter.
Honestly, it's a big step up from the previous Honda City, and it really makes it look like it's moved up a segment in terms of cabin ambience.
As for the equipment, they've stepped things up with this new City. You get full LED headlamps and an 8-inch touchscreen as you've already seen, but you also get a sunroof, auto climate control, auto headlamps, and cruise control. On the safety front, you get 6 airbags, rear parking sensors and camera, emergency braking warning lights, and a tire pressure monitoring system, plus hill start assist and stability control. And while it hasn't yet been tested by Global NCAP, which tests India spec cars, the new City did score 5 stars on the ASEAN NCAP crash test. However, features that really stand out are the aforementioned semi-digital screen-based dials, as well as the lane watch camera borrowed from the Civic and CR-V, which shows a camera feed of what's coming up in the left lane when you turn on the left indicator. As for the connected features, the Honda Connect 2.0 partner app does what you'd expect, giving you real-time vehicle location, speed and revs, fuel status, a driving score, facilities to turn on the AC, update your insurance, and more. But the really cool bit is it can be integrated with Amazon Alexa, so if you have such a unit at home, you can simply perform these tasks via voice commands. The Honda City then remains a well-equipped car, but it has to be said not quite as well-equipped as the Hyundai Verna. However, one area the Verna can't hope to match up in is the back seat.
Well, they've really gone and done it again with the back seat of the Honda City, haven't they? It's just so very comfortable. These seats are so well cushioned. The backrest angle is just about perfect, and just look at the room I have to stretch out. Okay, I'm just under 5'8", that's set to my position, but as you can tell, even with a lot of adjustment, nobody would have a problem for knee room. And well, they've scooped out the backrest just to give you that little bit more. The only thing is that headroom, while it's good enough for me, I suspect somebody who's over 6 feet tall might be quite close to the headliner. But apart from that, they've done a lot to make you more comfortable back here. There's this footrest that inclines your feet just the right angle. There are AC vents, of course. There are two 12-volt sockets, which I wish were USBs to charge your devices. There's this nice sunshade at the back, and even LED lighting to read your book if you wanted to. And speaking of devices, they thought of that too. Nice little pockets back here to store them.
The boot volume has actually gone down very slightly from 510 to 506 liters, but as I'm sure you can tell, it's still more than spacious enough. Now, before we wrap things up, there's just one more little thing we need to address.
Now we have to talk about the design of the new City, don't we? Because when the car was unveiled in Thailand last year, the design raised a lot of eyebrows, mine included. But they have made some improvements for the Indian version, notably these 9-element full LED headlamps which are borrowed from the sportier versions in Thailand, and those smarter looking alloy wheels which have a two-tone diamond cut effect. Other than that, you know the design. It's much like the Civic with this big bar of chrome that's tipped forward and swoops up to join the headlamp elements. But if we move back to those wheels, you'll notice that they are the same 16-inch size as before, and the tires are the same 185 section. And while the car has grown, the wheelbase has not. So those small wheels tend to stand out for being a little too small on what is essentially a bigger car. But there are still a lot of things to like. I like that they moved the wing mirrors from the A-pillar down to the door. That's a nice touch. I like this very bold line that's meant to resemble a katana blade. And I absolutely love the rear. These very three-dimensional LED tail lamps really give it a premium feel and elevate it above the old tail lamps you used to get in the old City. Now, Honda has intentionally abandoned the sporty or arrow shot look of the previous City for a more relaxed, luxurious, conventional sedan shape, because they said now that the City has grown bigger, it has also grown up.
And there's a very good reason it looks more grown up than the old City. For the first time in its history, Honda will sell the old City and the new City at the same time. The new City may not look all that new and striking, and the handling isn't something that would enthuse the keen ones behind the wheel, but there's little else to fault with it. Space and comfort are superb, the interiors look and feel premium, and it's very well spec'd with some neat party tricks. Both engines are strong and deliver a solid performance, and the ride is very well sorted too. So as things stand, this is certainly a car that should be high up, if not at the top of your considerations in this segment. But then, the price is a factor we don't know yet. But just the fact that the old City will continue suggests that the new one will be expensive. The current City costs between 9.91 lakh rupees for the base petrol and 14.31 lakh for the top-end CVT, which is already pricier than most rivals. So it's going to take some careful management of variance and pricing if Honda wants to dominate this segment with two models. Stay tuned, this tale of two cities promises to be a gripping one.